different kinds of spring management that goes on.
Well, and we've seen some prairies.
Yeah.
And you can tell prairies this time of the year because they look like they haven't been mowed or managed or cropped, or they look kind of rough.
And if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might think, oh, this is the field of old weeds.
Right. Because, prairie grasses especially, like big blue stem and switchgrass, they grow quite tall during the growing season, and then they, what's called lodge, in the wintertime they fall over.
Uh-huh.
And in order to keep your prairie healthy, it is really recommended that we do what, Nancy?
I think that I've heard two things. I've heard mowing is good, but burning is really good.
Yes. And to understand the dynamics of a prairie, people think, oh, I plant some seeds and whoo, I instantly get this beautiful, beautiful looking prairie. And actually, most prairie, depending on, of course, on what you seed, the first year it sleeps. So you're not going to see a whole lot of growth. The second year it creeps, which means it establishes a nice root system underneath, so you may see little tiny sprigs, but most of what's happening with the plants is it's building a massive root system. And then what happens in the third year, Nancy?
It leaps.
Up it goes. But we were able to get some footage of an actual prairie burn. And most prairie burns happen this time of the year, typically March or April. And then depending on the burn cycle, and if fall weather permits, you can also do a fall burn after the growing season is over. Now, you burn your prairie, don't you, Nancy?
I haven't for a few years, but I know I should. But I know a lot of people around here like to burn in the fall, and I was thinking I might do that.
And of course, we do have to be cautious. If you're going to do some type of whether it's a prairie burn or burning a wetland in your neighborhood that's on your property, you really need to talk with the local authorities, like your township.
Yeah, I think you need to get a burn permit, don't you?
I'm not sure. I think it's determined on a township by township basis.
Okay. I know some towns do.
Yep. You need to find out if you need to get a burn permit. Depending on the size of the burn, you may need to talk to the DNR about getting a burn permit. You definitely want to notify your local authorities. Hey, we're at XYZ Pretty Valley Road, and we're going to be doing a prairie burn. And then that way, the authorities know there's a pretty good possibility there's going to be smoke coming from your direction.
Uh-huh.
So that if a neighbor calls and they look it up on the 911 system, they can, oh, well, there's a burn going on back in that neighborhood. And don't worry, there's people watching it, etc. Unfortunately, in the 2021 burn season, there has been, some accidental fires that have gotten away in various parts of the state. Hopefully, we won't ever experience the type of runaway wildfires that California and Colorado and some of those states out west have experienced.
And even a small grass fire, you gotta know what your conditions are. You sure don't want wind.
Well, it's wind, it's relative humidity, how much fuel is, that's what they call the dead material, how much fuel is there to burn that fire, because depending on the amount of fuel determines how hot it will burn. And you don't want a super hot fire because you don't want to hurt your plants. You kind of want, a quick fire, it lights up, it burns itself out, and away you go.
Now I know that there are professionals that you can hire to do a burn.
Yes. And if, I see a lot of folks burning road ditches around their farmsteads or, spots here and there. And really, you should have some training, because there's ways to read the fire. There's methods that work to make sure your fire doesn't get out of control. You should mow fire breaks so that you've got a protective layer of green between, like, your property and the neighbor's property or what have you. So yeah, it's really important for us to understand that fire isn't always a bad thing. And actually it'll help bring on the forbs in your prairie stand, which are your flowering, the pretties.
Your flowers.
The flowers.
Yeah.
Yep, the flowers. Although the grasses are beautiful as well, Nancy.
Well, now I had heard that burning is really good for the grasses and mowing is good for the forbs.
Because I think it spreads the forb seeds around.
And you want, most people have a mixture
Yes.
in their prairie. They have the prairie grasses and the prairie flowers.
Yes.
So there's two different things that you can do to encourage it.
And see, the fire, I think because so many of the forb seeds are soft seeds, they don't have a hard seed coat on them. I think in a fire situation, I think they lose those seeds.
Oh, okay.
I think the seeds burn up.
Yeah. But probably now, isn't it also fairly good nutritionally for the soil?
Oh yeah. The ash that's left behind after a burn is kind of like a dose of Miracle-Gro across what was burned. Gets rid of the garbage, opens up the soil, and then when we get a little bit of moisture, it's all pretty much readily available to plant food.
And I suppose the other thing you really need to check is whether there's a burn ban on.
Yes, you do not want to, and Wisconsin just came off of a burn ban not that terribly long ago, and it's dry, Nancy.
Yeah, it is.
Where we're at here in Trempealeau County, it's pretty dry, and so you always want to be cautious. And there's, every phone number or every phone book has a hotline, and now with our computer technology, you can find out almost instantaneously what your burn status is, if it's a low fire hazard, medium, high, extremely high, or please don't burn.
Yeah.
Extreme. It's called
Right.
extreme.
Right.
Yeah, so, it's not all a bad thing. The prairies recover. They do very, very well. We just don't want them to get out of control.
Well, that's what it's all about, I guess. And we need to, if we think back to what Trempealeau County was like back in the 1850s when there were white people coming in here to settle. And we've said before that it was mainly prairie with few trees, but that was because there was a lot of burning. And some of it was done by the Native Americans, and some of it was purely, natural.
Slow down a bit. We'll get some of this.
Okay, I've got somebody behind me.
Okay. Yeah, following you so nice and close. And here's a spot that is recovering from a burn. And you can see how nice the starting to green up. And before you know it, this is going to be on the grow. It'll just be beautiful down here.
Why does it get all clumpy like that?
Because a lot of the prairie grasses are called bunch grasses.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how they do so well, is they form a bunch.
Okay.
Yeah. Roots that run 10, 12 feet down into the soil. It's just amazing.
And I was saying that a lot of these burns back in the day, in the 1850s or whatever, some of it was caused by like lightning strikes.
Yep.
So there were different things. They said that the burning, the Native Americans liked it because it kind of kept the brush down and it was easier for them to get around and to hunt.
Well, and it also gave the herds of what they were eating something fresh to come back to.
Yeah, that's right.
Instead of old dead grass that's, who likes that first slice of bread out of a bag when the bag was left open overnight?
Yeah.
Nobody. Why? Because it's old, dry, and crunchy. But the next slice in is pretty good. And so you burn off the top layer, and then that grass regrows, and it's going to provide food source for all the critters that are going to eat it.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it used to be, that I know when I was a kid, it was like Smokey the Bear and don't ever burn anything and only you can prevent forest fires.
Yep.
But they have come around to a little different understanding of the whole burn process.
Well, I think we're learning. We think we're pretty frisky. We think we know we have all the answers. But we've forgotten a lot of things that Mother Nature has taught us. Like, you need to have frequent little burns so that you don't build up a lot of trash to have a fire.
To have a big rip-roaring fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we as humans, I think we need reminders once in a while, Nancy.
Well, I know out west where they've had some really big fires. One time I was out in, I think it was like Utah, Arizona area, where there's the Dixie National Forest, and they were saying, there was a problem with forest fires starting out there. They really couldn't let them burn because there were areas in that national forest that were private land.
Oh, okay.
And people had built houses.
Yeah, and something like that goes up in smoke, then there's problems.
Well, their front lawns and what you would call a lawn in many cases was like knee-deep in pine needles.
Right.
Which would be very combustible.
Well, and very dangerous, because that's going to make a super hot fire, and super hot fires create their own winds.
And the problem there too was there had been a lot of that, there's a beetle, isn't it, that kills a lot of the pine trees?
Yes.
Is it
yes.
blister bark or something like that?
Blister bark beetle.
Yeah, and we could see whole hillsides, mountainsides of dead pine trees, which was a huge fire hazard. And if you didn't have to worry about the fire taking out somebody's house or a town, it would be a good thing to have it burn.
Right. Do you remember when Yellowstone burned?
Yes. Yeah.
And when Yellowstone burned, it was a national tragedy. Everyone was upset, but it wasn't until about 5 to 10 years later, scientists, because of course they're studying the effects of the fire, they began to see tremendous regeneration of tree species. It's kind of like, cutting off the old hair and letting the young hair grow through.
And also a whole lot of flowers and plants came out
that they thought were extinct.
Right.
Because they needed a burn.
That's right. And it was like I think it was a learning moment for a lot of people.
And it had
Nope.
positive,
I'm zoomed up
although,
on that fire
you know,
line.
initially it had negative effects because there wasn't a whole lot of to eat for the animals in the charred remains. But once the rains came and everything greened back up, it actually became very, very good for the wildlife.
Right. It wasn't the terrible, terrible tragedy that they thought it was, actually. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. A little bit about the importance of, if you've got prairie, that you need to maybe ponder doing a controlled burn.
Right. And I think that's, like you said, the main word there, the main phrase is controlled.
Controlled burn, yes. Yes. And, you know, like Nancy said, you can hire a company to do it for you. We just want to keep everybody safe.
Right, because we aren't living here without any neighbors.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want to do is light up the neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah, there we go. Topic for another time.
You bet.